Welcome to Weekly Weather Brief. I am so excited to be here today to wrap up the week with a new guest. Our friend Karen Jerriman is on vacation this week. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracey, co-host of this tiny bite-sized little podcast we do every Friday. And I brought in the most capable, smartest, and just one of the coolest people I know, Jen Carfagno, a fellow meteorologist, still working in television. You recognize her because she's on the Weather Channel every morning. Jen, we're so glad to have you on. Thanks for filling in for Karen this week.
I'm so excited to be here. And I was going to say, I've got some shoes to fill. We went running one time, Karen and I, at a weather conference, and she is a good runner. So I feel like, especially like on both notes there, both from a meteorological standpoint and from a running standpoint, I've got to fill her shoes today. So let's jump in.
Yeah, Karen's one of those people that does everything well. Everything she sets her mind to, she does well. But you're the same kind of person, so I have no doubt you're going to rock it. We try to get this done in about 10 minutes, so you want to dive right into some weather topics? Is that cool?
Let's try it. Yeah, let's
and
go.
I'm thrilled because you work in weather still currently. Like Karen and I do this podcast so that we can keep our minds kind of fresh and stay in tune with what's going on. But neither one of us really forecasts anymore or stays super up to date with current weather events. So it keeps us in tune. It keeps us kind of talking about these things. Hard to avoid the heat though, because I feel like it has been the talker for months now. And I mean, the Northeast, where I am in Charleston, it feels hot all the time, but like places in the Northeast have still been dealing with these record heat waves, right?
It was unbelievable, the heat and the humidity that was in the Northeast leading up to the 4th of July. Temperatures every day topping 100, multiple days in a row, overnight lows not dropping below 80, setting those record warm overnights. And I know you're dealing with it in Charleston because I've been
we're used to it. Yeah, but it's not just the heat and humidity. They kind of got this added element, especially over 4th of July weekend, of the storms.
And that's the thing about these heat waves. They, in the summertime, they almost always end in these big, massive windstorms. And so, yes, we finally broke the heat wave, but it came with a couple of rounds of pretty extreme thunderstorms with winds that knocked down tree limbs, power lines. Power was out for nearly 500,000 people leading up to the 4th of July holiday. And it was still hot. So that just made it excruciating.
Speaking of power and heat, this makes me think of Europe because we've been talking nonstop about European heat wave and what's been going on there. And a huge part of why this is such a talker is the fact that the air conditioning is just not as widespread across Europe as it is in the United States. In fact, I was looking up a stat. About 1 in 5 European households have air conditioning compared to about 90% of US households. So that taste of like what we get when the power goes out with a storm and a heat wave, like that's all the time in some of these places in Europe.
And that was the case for a lot of June. The whole month of June was really warm. We had heat back in May. It was much more extensive in June, setting all kinds of records. I just went through to kind of see where we were at, and there were 394 all-time heat records set during this heat wave in June in Europe, and 10 national records. It was just so widespread. It was daytime, it was nighttime. France had their hottest day nationwide when you average it out high and low together. Emily, as you talked about with the lack of air conditioning, there was at least 1,000 deaths because of this. And the warm overnights are a big part of it.
Yeah, if you think about it, like that's when your body recovers. That's when like you kind of are healing from whatever went on from the day. So if your temperatures aren't dropping, you don't have air conditioning, that you're not getting that overnight. It's such a health concern and you don't realize it because it compounds over time.
There was so much attention on the heat that we get in the summertime here in North America with World Cup coming here this year. And going into it, FIFA added the hydration breaks. They were all ready to combat the heat. So that was a given regardless of what the temperatures were. I'm looking at the temperatures in Europe, and I'm so glad we're not playing in a lot of countries there because it would be even hotter.
Do you know anything about like forecasting for the World Cup? Like, do they take into account nerdy things like wet bulb globe temperature, you think?
That is the only thing they take into account. I do know because I'm a little obsessed with it. And, and then there's so much drama too. I mean, these hydration breaks, people are booing them. The fans are booing them in the stadiums. But going back to the Club World Cup last year, it was hot in many matches. And that was sort of like the test case scenario for FIFA to see how we would host given our summertime weather. So they decided that, yes, we need to have hydration breaks because once the wet bulb globe temperature gets up into these unsafe levels, you need to add extra hydration. You might need to postpone or delay matches. We haven't gotten to that point yet. And I've been tracking in detail every single match. We don't get quite there because a little bit of wind, a little less cloud cover makes all the difference and can lower that wet bulb globe temperature to just below the threshold that's danger.
I feel like wet bulb globe temperature hasn't really had its day yet. Like it's going to become a lot more widespread and well known in future years because it's so useful.
It's so useful. And that's what I used to say about dew points. And I have to get on this soapbox of wet
For a
bulb
dew point cheerleader.
because people need to know about it. It's one of the most useful thresholds or measures, indexes, whatever that we have for heat health.
I love when you get nerdy, Jen. Okay, so we've talked about the heat, we've talked about Europe, we've talked about World Cup. What else has caught your eye this week?
Well, we just had a super typhoon. It's still ongoing right now, but that's Bavi in the Western Pacific. And this thing ramped up really fast. I don't know if it officially went through rapid intensification, but it sure seemed close to it if it didn't. But it ramped up really fast and it went right through the southern portions of the Northern Mariana Islands and Guam. Now, Guam thankfully was on the south side of it, did not get the worst of it. The core of the worst winds, though, did go over the island of Rota. And from the pictures I've seen, they were pretty hard hit. And they are an island that's used to this kind of weather. But this was intense. Winds over 180 miles per hour.
Yeah, the first Cat 5 to ever directly hit the island.
Yeah.
I was looking... and Karen knows this, I love like satellite imagery. I love Sierra satellite imagery. And they posted a pretty interesting image, and we'll link it in the show notes, of Bavi and the sea surface temperatures, and they color coded the sea surface temperatures. So it really, I feel like to the general observer, gives them an idea of like the fuel that's going into this thing and the warm waters that got it going. But we've been talking a lot about like El Niño this season and the Atlantic hurricane season. Do you feel like maybe the Pacific is kind of getting ignored because it's been very active there?
Well, yeah, the Western Pacific and also the East Pac has been busy already too. I think the reason why it ends up getting forgotten is thankfully most of the systems don't end up hitting land. And so, we keep ticking through the list, and thankfully not a lot of land in the way based on the way they form and the way they move. But you know what? Remember back, was it 2023? When did we have Hurricane Hillary that came up and it swept the storm into Arizona?
LA was like, oh my God.
Yes. And so that was a big El Nino year. So we will see what
happens. Yeah, it must have been 2023 then.
Yeah.
Yes, they were like, it doesn't rain here, let alone tropical storms. So that was a big deal.
Right.
Yeah, and the Hurricane Center says it. We say it only takes one.
It only takes one. And that was a storm that came from the Pacific. But, you brought up the Atlantic, and the update is out, the July update from Colorado State University for their outlook and prediction for hurricane season. And they dropped the numbers again.
Again, I know. I have them right here. They're down to 9 named storms, 4 hurricanes, 1 major hurricane. And we've had Arthur so far this year, but it has been a quiet year, and they just keep lowering it every time they do an update, which makes sense. You were telling me about the numbers of El Nino and kind of some unheard of numbers, right?
NOAA just put out their latest on El Nino and where we're at for measuring the change in the sea surface temperature and where we are compared to average in the region that they track for El Nino. And we're tracking 1.2 degrees Celsius above average. And that's an important number only because you got to put it in perspective. It's so much higher than what you would expect at this point going into an El Nino. It's higher. It's almost to what's considered a strong El Nino, which is 1.5. And we're tracking towards what is predicted to be a very strong El Nino, which would be 2 degrees Celsius above the average. And it seems like we're on our way there more aggressively than ever before. And so that's, one of the concerns people have. We're going to have such a strong El Nino and all the impacts that go from that. On the plus side, that does usually knock down the hurricane season in the Atlantic, but it doesn't mean that there'll be zero either.
Yeah. And we're really grasping at that because there are a lot of negative impacts. I just did a whole episode on my other podcast, Atmosphere, about coral bleaching and the concerns with that with El Nino. So definitely some things to bear in mind there. We're coming up on our 10-minute mark, but I want to hear before we go real quick about your podcast, because you have a podcast as well, Weather Geeks. I love listening to this. I listened actually to a really cool episode recently where you were talking about corals and sound with corals.
Sound, it was so interesting.
That is
Dr.
so interesting.
Marshall Shepard from the University of Georgia and I both host Weather Geeks, and that episode was so cool. They've sort of discovered that unhealthy coral reefs need the sound of healthy coral reefs as one of the factors to help them grow back. And that makes so much sense, right?
Yeah.
Sort of like health begets health. And if you hear the sound of fish nibbling on coral, when I say if the coral reef, like that environment has that, then the fish might come back. And it's so fascinating.
Fish FOMO. I love it. Cool. All right. So Weather Geeks, check that out. Jen Carfagno, thrilled to have you on. You were amazing. Will you come back sometime?
Please have me back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, as always, leave a comment below here on YouTube. And then, of course, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Jen, have an awesome weekend. Thank you for everything you contributed today.
Thanks for having me.